First of all, everybody, welcome. Really excited to be here. And thank you for joining this panel, which is really AMA's initial foray into talking to startups and startup marketers. It's an area that we've been talking about for quite some time. And I'm actually really interested in sharing not only my story, but the story of our panelists here. We've got two founders, we will have two marketers, and we're excited to get started. First off, just want to thank our partner, Greenbook, which is our premier partner. And Greenbook is really the leading voice in market research and consumer insight space. Happy to say that I get nuggets really a couple times a week from Greenbook that I share with my clients all the time. So if you're not familiar with Greenbook, it's probably worth becoming familiar with Greenbook. AMA, we are based in New York, leading chapter of the American Marketing Association. Our mission is really to inspire, support, and celebrate brilliance in marketing. We're an incredible, essential resource for marketers. I've been on the board for the past year and a half. Really impressed with the type of programming, opportunity for networking and knowledge, and anxious for you to really learn more if you have not been a part of some of the work that we've done. March is a really busy month. We've got 3 events. The first one is on March 11th. This is a marketer's toolkit workshop, really learning how to localize content that's relevant and cultural to end users. On March 18th, we actually have Leah Holzman, who's head of global marketing for Amazon Pay, and she's going to share her story at our ongoing Women in Marketing series. And then finally, on March 25th, please hopefully join a fireside chat on marketing to changing America, and gain some actionable steps on how marketers and researchers can better partner to bridge cultural gaps and better connect brands with all of their customers. And finally, if you're interested in joining the AMA or just learning more, please contact us at amanewyork.org, and we would be happy to answer any questions, tell you more, and have you join our chapter. We've got a series of panelists, and I'm actually going to ask each to introduce themselves. But before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit about me. My name is Aldor Brachimento. I'm currently a global marketing lead at Publicis Group, and I have had the experience of working in big corporations, and even corporations who actually have startup divisions. So it's been something that's been interesting for a really long time. What I noticed over the past couple of years is many of my peers have actually transitioned from the corporate world to the startup world. And the stories have really been fascinating. I think we have all found it incredibly challenging. I think that we have discovered the difference between true startups and big companies that want to act like startups. There's a huge difference there. And just really, what does marketing mean for a startup, and how do you define marketing in a very different world? So sharing stories today, we've got a couple people. We have Alex Kroneman, who's founder, Luke Cooper, who's also a founder, Candace Marshall, who has actually moved from the corporate world to a startup and now actually advises startups in a very different capacity. And actually, Bennett Porter will also be joining us. She's just a couple minutes late. So I'm actually going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll start from there. Alex, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, hi, I'm Alex Kroneman, CEO and founder of a company called Flight Desk. I got my start at Crispin Porter Bogusky in the media side, but always knew that this was kind of like the company that I wanted to build. And real briefly, we built the technology that powers like media and advertising on college campuses. So kind of have an interesting like meta marketing perspective here, because obviously we are a marketing company, but obviously sometimes we market ourselves. So that's me. And I am one of 2 panelists who went to the great Colorado College. So it's not every day that you get 2CC folks.
Candace.
Hi, I'm Candace Marshall. I'm the CMO at Tide Rock Holdings. We're an investment firm that owns a bunch of different startup to lower middle market type companies. I started my career in management consulting and have really run marketing for a lot of different large enterprise brands. I've also spent many years on the agency side in marketing services, working with Interpublic and WPP. Prior to working in startup land, I partnered with Alda, running the global UPS business at Ogilvy. And since then, I've been in the startup world. I was a CMO for My Gene Council, which is a consumer genomics company, as well as Marco Polo Learning, which is an ed tech company. Now I run marketing here at Tide Rock, which is, again, an investment firm, but also across all of our portfolio companies. So across very different industries.
Great. I think, Bennett, you've joined, yes?
Hello, I'm here.
Welcome. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. How are you? My name is Bennett Porter, and I am currently a board member and startup advisor. And I've worked in Silicon Valley for many moons and lots of gray hair to prove it. But before that, before coming to Silicon Valley, and I've worked in different phases, from companies that have just started to take their B round, C round of money, to startups that actually self-funded. But also started at one of the first internet companies that started sort of Yahoo, and saw that grow, and pre-bubble. And before that, I started in the agency world. So remember a time before the internet. So when dinosaurs roamed the earth. So I've had a really good perspective on how marketing has changed, the role of the marketer overall, in terms of, the advisor, the discipline itself and how it's changed. And it's been a really interesting road from a small liberal arts college nestled at the foot of Pikes Peak. So I'm giving myself away as the other alum from the Colorado College. So it's been a great role, and I would also say a very exciting time to be a marketer, and a real green field for marketers and startups.
Thank you. Luke.
Hey, everybody. I'm Luke. Great to see everybody tonight. I'm a 2-time founder. The most recent company was Fixed, or I was a founder and CEO as a solo founder. Started the company in 2013. With the idea that we could do the Genius Bar better than Apple could. There were 50,000 Genius Bar appointments daily at the time, and 300 Genius Bars. So there was immediately a capacity issue that we saw. And when I say we, I mean me. That's where I met Alex in Boulder when we were in an accelerator and talking about the ideas that we were both, sort of fumbling through at the time. But I took that idea and grew that company from a single person to making over 80 hires, raised about $7.5 million, including a $6.5 million Series A. I grew revenue 400% year over year, marketing our product to Fortune 500 companies that range from the Carlyle Group to Home Depot, NYPD, and many others. Built an engineering team, a great product that we ultimately sold to Assurant for 11 times revenue this past August. The second time I've done that. I'm the first African-American founder to do that in Baltimore, a city that is 70% Black. And so I think as much as we're talking about marketing and all the tactics that underlie marketing, we're also talking about marketing the untapped talent that we have in America that we've overlooked for so long. So I'm excited to join you tonight and talk about a wide range of topics. I was a JD MBA before I, was a founder, and we'll get into all of that later. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Luke. I should also mention that we will do a couple breakout groups, so you will have the opportunity to have, more one-on-one time with each of these panelists. And if there's anything that's you're really dying to ask, please put it in the chat. I'll do my best to try to keep track. If you just can't wait to the end. But again, thank you everybody for being here. Bennett, I love the fact that, you talk about marketing. This is such an exciting time for marketing. It is such an exciting time to be a marketer, but it's also a really challenging time, I think, to be a marketer. I would love to just start by asking a really sort of broad question about, what are the biggest challenges that, startups face when it comes to marketing, both from, a founder perspective, but also working as marketers in startups. And Luke, you're shaking your head there. Do you want to start?
Sure, I don't mind. I think one of the biggest challenges that they face today is that the gap between creation and consumption is continuing to narrow, right? And so you think about marketing back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, or not really 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? Like you had this long trough between the time you created a product and the time that you got it into market, right? And so and marketing sort of filled that void very, very well, right? But over time, with enhancements to how we manufacture things, to how we create software products, that gap has narrowed, right? So a great example of this, I think, is TikTok, right? TikTok, you create something and you share it almost immediately, right? So you can begin to think about marketing, in my mind, for startups. Like the place that you've got to think about is like algorithmic marketing. How do you create things in a way that like are giving you information, and then your product is morphing, changing, evolving based on the information you get, right? I think that is as much marketing as, other aspects of marketing, like marketing yourself, right? Like you're building a company, right? That's great. You want to sell the product. Ultimately, you want to extract some of that value for your investors and all the employees that have believed in you. And so to some extent, you've also got to market yourself, right? So I think those are some of the twin challenges I would point out in startup marketing today.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point of having to market yourself. And I think, as a founder, it's not just a company, it's also you. Alex, is that something, I know that's really something that, startups and Flight Desk in particular, so much of the personality and the brand really comes from the founder. And how do you evolve that? I mean, how do you grow it? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think I feel like an incredible amount of gravity in any kind of marketing activity, because at least so far, I have not been able to separate like myself, my beliefs, like my being with the company itself. And I don't know, maybe I'll never do that. Maybe I will. I'll check back in a couple of years. We'll see kind of what that process is. Although it's been a while, and I don't know. I thought that we'd be a lot smaller when we kind of like molted that philosophy, but it hasn't happened yet. And so I find everything to be incredibly personal, and anything that we put out there like has to reflect the true core, like to a very ridiculous extent. Like I have like we have someone who's probably our most junior person on staff. She's lovely, but probably the most junior person. And we just said, hey, make us look a little bit more active on Instagram. And something so simple that doesn't reach anyone and seems to have like almost no stakes, the slightest thing off that was like, didn't reflect, my deepest belief. Like we had meetings about it. We should not have meetings about it. So very personal. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Hey, Candace, is that resonating?
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I actually wrote down that I'd love to share is that in an enterprise business, you have a lot of stakeholders. So you're building a brand, you're talking to a bunch of stakeholders and you're getting input. But in the startup world, the founder is it, right? And you need to make sure you have 150% alignment with that founder and CEO, because that is exactly the issue, is that whatever you put out there reflects the CEO's personal beliefs and the brand. And it's really difficult to separate the two.
Now, Bennett, you have, I mean, you started, I'm thinking about SurveyMonkey in particular, really from the beginning, through a very incredibly, successful growth, and also, I think unforeseen issues that most startups don't actually face. How have you navigated that? Because you have very strong opinions, and I mean that in the best of ways. And how have you reconciled that with founders?
I think that the one thing that I've seen and is that you have to, have a very truthful relationship with your founders, and you have to play that role of consigliere with your founder, and you've got to have a founder that is ready to play ball. I think the challenge is, however, sometimes founders don't know what they want out of marketing. It takes a very sophisticated founder to actually know what they want and need. And so sometimes they're not ready. And to be quite honest, there's usually quite a predictable journey that they go through in terms of what they need from a marketer. The first thing they need is they need to kind of, fill the restaurant. They need somebody to drive demand. And so, while in essence, everything comes from the fountain and the brand is really the founder, it's kind of like, I need to fill seats. I need people to use the product. And so if, you are not, and that's why usually the first type of marketer into a startup is a demand person. And why, it's a cult of personality in terms of the founder that drives brand. But sometimes it's like, the founder really thinks about brand as a secondary thing because they're heads down, driving product. But the more, sophisticated, founders that I've worked with really think about marketing, like, the ones that think about it from a higher level, think about it from that brand level. What they really do think about that story, that narrative. How do they use marketers to drive strategic business decisions to really then use marketing to differentiate themselves in the market, and then kind of, turn that narrative, and so you can really start to have a seat at the table to be that voice, to not just execute, but it takes a very sophisticated founder to be ready for that conversation.
So you and Candace in particular, have transitioned from, bigger, more corporate roles to, to more of a startup world in terms of, and actually Luke and Alex, you can weigh in here too, but in terms of sometimes it's not just about the skills a marketer has, or it's certain kinds of skills a marketer might have that are much more relevant to startups. But it's also about perspective, personality, culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot about, what makes a perfect startup marketer, especially when a startup wants to take advantage of somebody who has experience. But just because you have experience doesn't mean you're going to be successful. So I'd love your thoughts on, you know, how founders can be more successful hiring marketing people, but when marketing people have opportunities in front of them, which seem really exciting and amazing, what questions do they need to be asking? What questions do they also need to be asking themselves in terms of, am I the right person to do this? And Candace, you're shaking your head. Why don't you start?
I always shake my head, so so ignore that in the future. No, this is something that I actually thought about quite a bit, because I ran through 3 different startups before I landed this job. And I thought through what it is that would make a marketer successful in a startup quite a bit. And I think it's what Bennett said. At the startup level, you need to have that really strong chemistry and relationship with the founder, because because priorities change all the time, and you need to make sure you're always in lockstep. And that's how I think then you can decide together when demand makes sense, when branding matters, when investor relations matters, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things that you need to do, and you have to prioritize. So a lot of my vetting actually ended up being with the leadership team and making sure that I feel comfortable pushing back and getting feedback from the CEO or founder, and feel like I do have that seat at the table to provide, you know, whatever experience or skill they need, you know, for that particular company. Because they're different kinds of people with different skill set. And I don't think that there is a single set of characteristics for a startup marketer. I think it really depends on the company.
I think Candace is right. I would say that the other thing I would say is, if you are currently a corporate marketer and you're looking to make a move to a startup, make sure you've been through one cycle of in a corporation, which is an upswing and a downswing, and then another upswing. If you're only riding a high, but you've never seen a low, don't go to a startup yet, because you're not gonna like it. Because I really do think that experience of in a corporate setting of being able to like ride the high and the low and dig yourself out of it, and then, you know, recovery is very important. It's important to know how to do it, and to take that experience and then apply it to a startup is infinitesimally more valuable to a startup at that point in time, with that type of experience under your belt. If you've only seen the highs, you won't know how to help a startup, you know, when they can recover. So I would say stay at, you know, in the corporate world, you know, and get that experience. The other thing is that you have to realize that you're not going to have the resources and the team at a startup that you did in corporate. So if you like, you know, a 5-person team and you like delegating, like, the startup world is not for you. You know, I was a VP of myself when I started at my first startup. And so when things, you know, stopped getting done when I went to sleep, and I was like, well, this kind of sucks. Where's, you know, my team? Now, luckily I did like to do things, and I was able to build my team, you know, over the years. But I think you've got to also have that conversation with yourself, is what kind of marketer and how, you know, dirty and how hands-on do you want to be? You know, and I think that there is that opposite can be true. Sometimes when you're a startup marketer and you go to the corporate world, you're like, I can't not put my hands in stuff, and I can't delegate. And so sometimes I've seen startup marketers go the other way and just, you know, can't get out of my team's way, because, you know, you can't get out of the weeds. So those are some things to think about. The impact you can have in a startup, though, is almost addictive. And I think that that's the thing that is hard for me to even go back to a corporate world, because you love the feeling of the impact that you have to help teams, product, founders. And that's what's so, I think, satisfying in being a marketer for startups.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too, I think, is that in the enterprise world, I actually joked about this towards the end of my enterprise career, which is we like to present to each other in the corporate world. And in the startup world, that's not going to work. You know, you have to get, you know, what would have gone in a 100-page deck into 5 pages, if that, because there's just not enough time or patience to go through all of that. So one thing that I found was really valuable for me was that ability to simplify, get all the things that you want to get into it as a marketer, but simplify, because at the end of the day, there's just not that, or the resource or the time or the money to go through all of that. But yes, I agree. Once you're in and you have that entrepreneurial spirit, super exciting, super fulfilling, and it's hard to go back.
Okay. Alex and Luke, from your perspective as founders, comments?
I was going to say, I don't have anything to add, but I agree.
Yeah, I have a little bit to add here. I'll be brief. I think there are 2 issues here, right? Like, one is like, you know, whether or not you take the plunge and leave a corporation or a big company to go join a startup. I'm always going to be in favor of that. And regardless of like what your perspective is and what you want to do, I think, you know, after you've gotten some experience in a large company, you know, 2-3 years, I think that's a sufficient test bed to now take that to a startup, because there's nothing like a startup when it comes to learning. It stretches you like no one's business. We had one of our employees, right? By the time we exited, we had hired over 80 employees. One of our employees was a woman named Share. Share is a single Black mom from Baltimore, Maryland, who had no background, didn't go to college, had no background in marketing at all. By the time she was done, right? By the time we exited, right? She was running our biggest account that accounted for roughly 50% of our revenue. And she also made $500,000 on the transaction, right? But the point here is that like it starts with culture. It starts with culture. You as a marketer, I think we kind of touched on like aligning yourself with the founder. I think that's part of it, right? But that's a cult, right? Like there are definitely elements of cults in startups. There's no question about that, right? You want that because you want everybody singing to the same, you know, beat, right? They're marching to the same drum, whatever. And so culture really dictates to some extent, you know, how you're going to approach all the various functions in a startup, right? And one of them is marketing, right? And for that function to work properly, it has to work differently according to where you are in your startup journey, right? If you're very early in the product's evolution, if you're in the product phase, product building phase, that's a very different marketer than, you know, someone who's in the scaling phase or in the optimization phase. Those are different skill sets entirely. And so you as a founder, right, have to be aware of like what game you're playing and where you are, because that will dictate what troops on the ground, you know, you put on the ground. And so I think that's the way that I sort of have defined marketing. It didn't work like, you know, for the first couple of years, because I did it, you know, and the way that most founders do. I'm going to go hire a big CMO that can, like, you know, I can offload all this marketing activity to. But in that earliest phase, you need Davy Crockett, who is like, they're marketing, they're throwing out little things and then getting, you know, signal back and then like foraging more, right? Without Davy Crockett, we don't settle Tennessee, right? And so that's the kind of marketer that you need at the very earliest phases. And, you know, again, like I've learned that as a result of just being in the trenches with it. So I'd be delighted to hear other comments or questions on that.
Yeah, actually that, the notion of, you know, well, timing being everything, typically, even in any world, right? It's like you could be trying to sell on an idea for like years, and then all of a sudden one day it just happens to be the right time. And I think we've all had that experience, but with startups in particular, you know, there are so many different stages, and to your point, you kind of need different things. You know, how have you experienced that? You know, like what are those stages, and at what stage how do you know what you need? And, as being, no matter all of us being responsible for marketing, how do you know, and how do you know what you need? And also then I think the other big question is, how do you balance the building the business, whether it's butts in the seat, dollars in the pocket, because that is always what you're thinking about with a startup, versus all the other things that that you need to do to be successful, whatever success looks like, whether it's actually exiting, whether it's a sale, whether it's showing momentum. And as marketers and as founders, how do you balance those things? And then how do you balance them within the organization?
I've found and I'm going to do my best to kind of describe this moment. But when I've talked to marketing folks or folks in many kinds of roles, people are excited genuinely, whether they work with you yet or not, to help grow your business. And I have found that it is very easy to get seduced by this idea that there is some easier way to find growth, to find money, to find people to fill your seats. And it takes an immense amount of restraint and likely experience, and even more likely some doing it wrong, to be able to say, no, that's not what I need right now. I've definitely hired folks who have said, we can get more butts in the seats. But you have to admit at some point, that your seats are full. You do not have any seats to accommodate people. And yet, on the other hand, when we find the buzzwords, whether it's building the plane as you're flying it, or blitz scaling, or any of these other ridiculous concepts, there is some truth to the best motivation to go build a seat is to have someone who wants to sit there. So it's that's a dance that is very difficult.
I think, some of my experience has been, and, whether it's in the corporate world or the startup world, is we all have a case study. We all have an example of a startup that did it right. For a while we were talking about, sort of the story, the narrative of Airbnb. And how they scrapped it together for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden this happened. And so I feel like, because of the uncertainty and even the chaos, you try to define it, you try to define a moment, or you try to define another case study. Have you had that experience at all? And what have you used as maybe your examples of a startup that has done it right?
I have a perfect example for that. One I admire deeply. He's become a good friend of mine as well. He founded the company called Calendly, and a lot of people don't know this story of how he sort of originated this idea. He actually failed on a number of attempts before he actually came up with Calendly, with other solutions, and then eventually landed on Calendly. But even on the run up in Calendly, the way he was marketing was to exactly what I described before, pulling signal from the marketing from the market on, what tools, what considerations their users cared about the most, which drove what features would define the product altogether. Right? To me, that's all part of marketing. And him getting that stage right. This is why that matters so much. And how I think it was Candace or Bennett that made a great point about marketing driving the financial goals or business goals of a company, right? And this is a perfect example of that. Because he got that segment right, he was able to defer fundraising. So he only raised $300,000 in the first 4 years of his existence, maybe 5 years of his existence. He just did his Series A or Series, I don't even know what they're calling it, right? But because he defined that, he knew what stage he was in, and he could defer fundraising and continue to like perfect the product, market, perfect the product, create virality around it, get the right growth vectors. He now just closed a $300 million round with $300 million round on like a $3 billion valuation, right? And that round started at like a $60 million round, right? Because I was invited into it. I didn't invest because I didn't want to come in late, but 60 million goes to 300 million in one round, right? Like that just speaks to the audacity of what he created and how he marketed that business in the very earliest foundations. And it doesn't hurt that he's a Black founder that did that. Yet again, demonstrating the untapped talent that we are not taking advantage of in this country.
Yeah,
I think that's a great example. I'll give you, and we talked about this earlier, which is this myth of product-led growth. And this idea that if you build it, they will come, and that you actually don't need marketing, and that it just is like this magical thing. And I think that it's not exactly, it's actually not at all to what you had just asked us about, which was this idea of the case studies that we point to. But I think it's actually one of the things that keeps marketers out of startups for a long time, because I think founders don't think they need it. I think that, I think a lot of founders live under this mythos that if I just build this product that is perfect, I don't need marketing, and I think that Calendly is a great example that used marketing in the build, but it is something that is, leveraged, all of its learnings to build a great product. But it's, this mythology that if I just build this amazing product, I will need no marketing. And that's something that we fight in the startup world all the time, that I don't need marketing. It will just organically just show up.
yeah. And I think, Candace, you have an interesting perspective because you're working with a portfolio of companies who may have had marketing in some respect or maybe not at all. So you're actually dealing with, multiple founders / CEOs. How have you done, what have you seen there?
I think that it's back, Luke was talking about different stages. I think Bennett is as well, right? So it really depends on which stage. So one of my findings in exploring is that this stage of where you go from growth to scale up is really a really good place for somebody who has actually worked in the corporate world to be in, because there you need processes and systems to be able to scale. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're just, when I was working in, pre-Series A startup, that's a very different kind of marketing, right? And the cash is not there, and the teams and resources are not there. So now this place that I'm in, I'm able to basically put in marketing in all of them in a very equivalent way, and actually build the infrastructure to do branding and demand and, content and social and Salesforce, B2B, whatever it is. So I think really understanding where you fit in, and then I do believe the culture. I like the notion of a cult because it is a little bit like that, right? Really understanding whether you fit in that or not is really important, because you're going to be your 24/7 job. You're on call all the time, and that's just the lifestyle, but it is very fulfilling. The other thing I would say is that I think that the marketers that have done well, and I know this wasn't really the question that you asked, are, there's this fluidity that marketers will need to have in the startup environment that is really critical, because it is really about what the priority is at any given time, and needing to be able to be flexible, to focus on marketing activities that fit the needs of the company in that given moment. Because startups tend to be opportunistic. You're going after the potential sales, the projects, the fundraise, the money, etc. And so you'll be able to actually be flexible and manage your marketing in a way that enables that. I think is also very critical.
What types of marketers, you know, certainly in the corporate world, you know, we talk about top of the funnel, we talk about the lower funnel, we talk about demand, we talk about brand, you know, and typically you don't get all of those things. So I guess considering, you know, maybe the question is, at what stage do you need what type of marketer? How do you think about that? Or is it really possible for a more general marketer who can, you know, has had experience, you know, throughout, you know, all those stages of marketing? Or thoughts there?
No, I think it's a great question. And I think it's possible, right? I think it's possible. The latter part of what you said is certainly possible, to find someone who can span, you know, sort of multiple dimensions and growth, you know, sort of stages of a startup. But again, I come back to the issue of culture, right? I think it all comes back to culture. And if your culture is defined as, we're going to be data driven in how we make decisions, then, you know, at the earliest stages, you need someone who is that way, right? And who is not going to just run away with the excitement of being in a startup, because it's just, you know, there are so many things to get excited about when you join a startup, and when you start something, right? When you start something and you start to see validation for that thing, right? That you're learning piece by piece, and then you raise money, and, like, you know, I don't know about most people, right? But I think it's probably not common for most people for their accounts to, like, one day have $2 million in it, or $5 million in it, or 10 million. It's exciting, right? It's like, wow, these investors believe in me. And so that euphoria a lot of times forces the founder, who doesn't adapt, you know, good culture in his company, to move outside of making data-driven decisions. And now you're just acting, and now you're just doing things. And guess what? When you hire a marketer at that early phase, they're going to be the same way. So I think there's some attributes of marketers that span all stages. Like, you want somebody always data driven, right? But you also want somebody who knows when to divorce themselves of that, you know, the thing that they see in front of them that's telling them they're going to continue to lose customers, because they know something else is going to affect that number positively real soon, right? Like, that's someone you need maybe at the later stages, who's optimizing the product, right? So I think it really depends on the type of company you are, you know, and the phase that you're in. But as a founder, I mean, analyzing it from that perspective will always yield good results.
I forget exactly what the question was, but I think this will be in response to it. Like, I feel like a startup is kinetic energy, and you have this momentum that you can do stuff with. And I think why a lot of companies that maybe aren't as well defined, but, you know, raise a gajillion dollars, like, when you throw a gajillion dollars at something, you can make it feel like it's working, even if it's not. And so I think a lot about how I spend that kinetic energy. And when I am going to go cash in on an idea or go all in on something, I really want it to be right. And so what that makes me think of is, I care about brand first and foremost. Brand. And then if there's a segment that is worthy of optimizing, then that's kind of secondary. But the way I think about it is just like, by doing more brand marketing, you can build more of that kinetic energy, and then kind of spend it at the right time.
Yeah,
but I think that this is a great example of what Candace said at the beginning, which is it totally depends on the founder. And if it is what the type of marketer that a company hires, a startup hires, will be dependent on not only the phase of the startup, but alignment with the organization, which ultimately really is the founder. Now, and I'll throw a curveball in here too, which is sometimes, here's what happens. You have full alignment with the founder, but the organization may need something different. Mm-hmm. And if you have a founder who is not strong enough to force their vision or back up the marketer and say, like, this is what I believe, like in Alex's case, like brand first, you know, and then you've got a board kind of pushing another agenda because maybe there's not this alignment, you're going to have a hell of a time. So I do think that every marketer that takes a position within a startup, you need to make sure that founder, board, company, which means like the sales team, right? The engine product team, you have full transparency of what your remit is in terms of your role as marketer.
What's the riskiest decision you had to make, and what was the outcome? It does, when you work for a startup, you've like every day you're making a bet, and some days you're making like 20 bets. Is there a moment in time where you made a bet, you knew you were making a bet, and how did it turn out?
I'd love to take that question first. Oh my God, I had so many of those, Alda. I mean, you might have like heard a couple of these over the dinner table a time or two, but certainly at the earliest foundational stages, we pivoted, because I saw a big problem in insurance, $1 trillion industry. I had been an in-house counsel at State Farm, so I knew that market really well. I, fresh off my MBA from Babson, previous exit. So I'm like, oh, okay, I know this problem. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. Completely wrong on every, conceivable aspect of it, right? And so then I pivoted, right? So that was a little bit of a deviation. But then when I raised real money, right, roughly 800K in my first round, my first seed round, roughly 800K, I felt the pressure to deliver on what investors had, bought into, the vision that I had, which was at that time to do this whole fulfillment process where if you bought a product, we would let you scan it and determine which warranty you wanted. You could buy the warranty on our platform. You could then do away with the warranty paperwork and go onto our platform and manage all your other activity related to that, device, right? Whether it's maintenance or anything else. Oh, by the way, if you need a repair, someone to send someone to you to help you with that issue, we'll do that too. Right, so we had this incredibly complex sequence of services and motions in the business that were not working well, right? Like I couldn't figure out why, I couldn't get customers completely through the cycle, continuously and repetitively. And so one of the big decisions that we made very early on was to cut the first 4 things and just do repair, because that's all you care about anyway. I just want my thing that I broke repaired. I want somebody to come to my house. And as an IT organization, because we were marketing to all kinds of organizations to figure out where we were getting signal from, right? We learned that IT organizations within large enterprises really had this problem. And it was an $18 billion market. Oh, okay. So now how do we serve that market? Oh, we got to build some enterprise tooling around the thing that we built. So they need a CRM, they need an enterprise portal, and off we went, right? And that's how you market. Like I still call on Coca-Cola to this day, the CIO, and just throw ideas at them, right? Because that's the kind of organization they are. They want to learn, right? They really want to learn. And so, marketing is as much about like figuring out like those components as it is anything else. Sorry for monopolizing. Hopefully that was an enjoyable story.
I got a story. In my first foray into the startup world, I had a great conversation with the CEO and the other founder, and had really good understanding of what needed to happen. Kind of thought about it. Here's the marketing strategy. Here's the marketing approach. It's a B2C. We're going to go in and build a brand and acquire consumers and so forth. It was in the consumer genomic space. 23andMe was going bang up. Ancestry was coming in. And built this whole plan and executed it, spent a bunch of money that they didn't really have. And then to realize, it's really early for the consumer space to really do this. It does not make sense at all. Their better bet is to get big contracts with health, with hospital systems or whatnot, because that would be a faster way to get scale. And I, to this day, I feel really bad for doing that as a marketer. And then that to me was kind of a learning pain, so to speak. But you grow from it and you move on. But those are some things that without the really good alignment and inexperience in this space, I think I would have done very differently otherwise.
Great. You talk about alignment, and actually a question has really come in terms of, we're really focused on the founder as singular. That's a lot of what we're speaking about, but I know that it's not just the founder, it's the founder's team and the team around them. I think it's really interesting that even though I know you've all worked in big organizations where there is a management team, you're also quite focused on the founder. Could you talk a little bit about that dynamic, the dynamic with the team versus the founder, and how that will impact marketing and ultimately a marketer's success?
Yeah, I think that plays into it substantially, right? Like, so as a young marketer joining a marketer joining a young team, you really want to have connectivity to the entire leadership team. I like what Candace said about her finding, this opportunity that she's at now as a result of like doing that work to make sure there was alignment. So I think there is that alignment, but again, I just come back to culture, right? It comes right back to culture, because if there isn't alignment on that management team that we're going to make data-driven decisions about who we hire, how we fire, how we do everything, then like it doesn't really matter, whether you have alignment with that founder or one person on that team. It's not going to succeed, right? And all of that culture gets defined on the basis of what you are and where you're going. Certainly that's dictated by the founder, right? But the culture has to be one that forces that founder to, and also that team to constantly review and assess where they are. Jack Dorsey had a great, statement on this. He talked about how he saw himself, right? He considered himself to be the chief editing officer, not the CEO of Square, but the chief editing officer, because constantly surveying the organization based on the leadership principles established by it at its founding, whether or not there's alignment and growth in the right vector, given what they want to accomplish, right? So I think it comes back to that kind of alignment, at the foundational management team level.
Bennett, do you have anything to add there? You've worked with some very, very interesting teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I've been very lucky to work with some of the best founders, in the world. And I think that what's interesting is that not all founders are perfect. And, definitely, and some of them are, but they come in all shapes and sizes, just like people. And it's really hard, though, I think, to tell a founder they're wrong. And that sometimes, when the numbers aren't right, or when you don't have the right information, and you've got to have that hard discussion with a founder, to find that fortitude to have the conversation, you've got to. And they don't want to hear it sometimes. And so, because it is their singular vision, and sometimes they don't, have the life experience to hear it well, because sometimes, they're just young. And I do think that they're, just like every other person, there's a spectrum in terms of founders and their ability to, and EQ. And so I do think that sometimes you find that perfect founder, and sometimes you don't. But I think that as a marketer, you have to figure out, like, what role am I going to play in this organization? And, as the, usually you're there as, I'm here to, deliver the goods and to drive narrative and to, sell my company and to help bring the founder to life. And sometimes you have really hard conversations, and you have to be ready to kind of like put that mirror of reality to the face of the founder, and the executive team, and those kind of can put you in a sticky situation, and you may not be the most popular person sometimes, which is also why the lifespan of a marketer is short.
Maybe a couple of things there. Like the first thing I thought of is like, sometimes I feel like the people that'll tell you that you're wrong are like the most important folks. It's like when George would tell Steinbrenner and Seinfeld like that he was an asshole, and he's like, "Yeah, you're promoted." And like sometimes I feel like there's an element of that, but also like at risk of exposing probably the great deal of egg on my face. Like in terms of like where that comes from of the singular vision, my experience at least has been, I've been told so many millions of things. Why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do it that way? Why isn't it this? Why isn't it that? Why are you focusing on this thing? Why like and because there are so many millions of permutations of what this thing could be, I find that my own stubbornness comes from like, you know what? It could be any of those things. But at some point, I just had to make a decision that it's going to be this thing. And maybe that'll be great. Maybe that won't be great. But if you don't have enough fortitude in that decision, then you're just going to wish wash, and never get anywhere. Of course, I don't know if this is part of what goes into perfection or what that looks like, but perhaps part of that getting closer to perfection is knowing when you have to be slow to give up on a deeply held belief, but when you do it, you got to do it immediately and find your next deeply held belief. And knowing that moment is really difficult.
That's great. Thank you, everybody. We have the opportunity to break out into groups, but before we do that, and Esther, I think we have maybe another minute or so, I would just love for each of you to just give just 3 words. There's a lot of people in our audience that are thinking about joining startups as marketers. What are 3 words, 3 little teeny tiny pieces of advice that you would give them? What do they need to know? What do they need to think about? Go ahead, Alex.
Don't do it. I have never, ever, ever, ever in my whole life, which maybe isn't long enough to be able to say this, but I have never met anyone who wanted to join a startup specifically and then was super happy that they did it. Like, if you're going to join a startup, like join a startup because that startup is like tackling a problem that you want to dedicate yourself to. Yep. Join a startup because that team are people that you're just going to fall in love with and build something great. Yep. If you want to join a startup because you want to join a startup, don't join a startup.
That is really perfect advice. Okay, Luke, I know it's hard to keep you to 3 words, but I'm going to keep you to 3 words.
Can I do 9?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. I'll say product market fit. All right. So at the earliest stages, you got to be looking for that. Go to market fit. In the middle, you got to be looking for that. And at the last phase, you got to be doing whatever it takes to get over the hump and help the founder get to a good outcome. I certainly second Alex's comments too. I'm going over 9. I'm sorry. I can't help it. That's the lawyer in me. But I think it comes down to lots of things. Like if you like what Alex said, like you do want to join a company that you're joining something that you believe in and a strong culture. There's no question about that. But also I think the other side of it has to be true too, in terms of like you wanting to learn and adapt and grow yourself in some meaningful way that isn't linked to that founder or isn't linked to that company, because that is also the very definition of culture. Because you're coming in with some culture and you're going to help us define that as well. And so be on the lookout for that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Candace Bennett. I just made you one name.
Oh, I will echo what Alex and Luke said. It's really know what you want and why. You know, that's not three, but.
All right.
I will it's similar. I would say don't join a startup, join a team. And so that's my three, is just be super picky about the team that you join. So in summary, it's kind of like, make sure you join a team that deserves you, that deserves your expertise, but also, that has a culture that aligns with yours, that needs your skills as a marketer, and that has that right fit for you. So and I guess that's, while it's important in a corporation, a bigger corporation, it is so important when you join a startup that you join the right team.
That is just, God, what a perfect wrap up. Thank you. Love it. All right. I think Esther's going to put us into groups, really meant to just do a little networking. We'd love to know, what attracted you to this panel. Share a couple of ideas. We'll come back for a couple minutes and we'll go have a nice night.
So Alda, I was mentioning that if the panelists would like to share some of the key takeaways from their breakout rooms, just so we all know a little bit of what was discussed on the other breakout rooms.
Oh, we can't tell you what was discussed in our room. I'm only kidding. That's great. Thank you. Alex, you want to start?
I have to say what was discussed in our room. I got to go on my soapbox about the fallacy of work-life balance for a minute. That was fun.
Oh, interesting. I would have loved to have heard that.
Yeah.
Okay. Luke.
I thought we had you were in that room, Alda. Thank you for the administration. Yeah, I think we had a really engaging conversation. Lots of great questions about like how to get the timing, how to figure out, where the fit lies between like your skill set and a startup, and how to, think about, early entry. And a lot of that came down. I shared a link to a first round article that talks about the 40 best interview questions that you can ask in a startup, environment to figure out culture, right? And I think those same questions are ones that, at the heart of them will tell you whether it's a fit at the place that you're trying to work at or not. So I think those questions are super helpful from a founder perspective. If you're thinking about founding something, then again, like understanding where sort of what game you're playing and where you are is going to tell you who to hire, who to partner with, and those kinds of things. So, I mean, I think that sort of covered the bulk of our conversation. We talked about, the dearth of resources for African-American founders and things like that as well. But I thought it was a very hearty, well participated conversation.
Great. Do we still have Candace?
Sure. We talked about a lot of different things, but generally good feedback on this topic. I think there are a lot of interest in it. We also talked a lot about the different tools that marketers can now use that's available on the internet to really manage marketing, right? And it didn't used to be like that, dating myself. And then the other thing we talked about was that I thought was really interesting was how in startups, the roles are much more fluid, right? Whereas in the enterprise world, you have kind of a job description and you do that. In a startup, it's like all hands on deck. And so if you don't have that kind of mentality, it could be a culture shock.
Cool. All right.
I think in ours, we got to know each other. We just, I think spent some time, and I was really inspired to hear that like there were some women that were thinking about starting their own startup as opposed to joining a startup, right, which was awesome to hear. And taking the plunge, and we had some great conversations and individual questions, and then I would say, and I mentioned this in my breakout session, and I just want to say, for women that are thinking about joining startups, please remember to get your equity. don't be afraid to ask for your equity, because that is something that we sometimes forget and we don't know exactly what equity to ask for. So don't be afraid and make sure that you get your piece.
I love that. I love that on so many levels. Thank you. I really, really, really appreciate Luke, Alex, Candace, Bennett. I actually learned a lot in this in this panel as well. And thank you everybody for joining. Don't forget to visit some of or join some of our other programs. And have a great night. Thank you.